On May 3, 2010, George Luca made a phone call that should have solved a murder. He'd just witnessed Emmanuel "Lolly" Jackson, South Africa's strip club kingpin, get shot multiple times in his Edleen home. Luca knew who pulled the trigger. He knew why it happened. And he called Joey Mabasa, head of Gauteng Crime Intelligence, to report everything. But here's what doesn't make sense. 15 years later, Jackson's murder remains officially unsolved. No one has been convicted. The case file sits open, gathering dust. How does a witnessed murder with an immediate confession call turn into a legal black hole? The answer reveals something darker than the killing itself. A justice system so fractured, so compromised, that even when criminals want to talk, nobody can agree on what they're saying. Joey Mabasa was the head of Gauteng Crime Intelligence when his phone rang that Monday evening. On the other end was George Luca, a Cypriot national who helped Jackson launder millions through offshore accounts. Luca had a problem. Emmanuel Jackson was dead in his house, shot multiple times in the lounge. Blood was spreading across the floor, and Luca needed to explain what just happened. Now this is where the investigation immediately splits into two irreconcilable versions. According to Mabasa's public statements, Luca confessed to killing Jackson. The Hawks, South Africa's priority crime unit, ran with this narrative. They had their shooter, case closed, just needed to arrest him. But Luca told a completely different story. In a taped interview from 2012, he insisted, "They know I didn't pull the trigger. I was there, I saw what happened." He claimed he called Mabasa specifically to tell him who really killed Lolly. Not to confess, but to name another shooter. Think about what this means. The investigation's most crucial piece of evidence, the shooter's identity, was disputed from the very first phone call. We have the alleged killer saying he didn't do it. We have the police saying he confessed. And we have no recording of the actual conversation. This wasn't some miscommunication that got cleared up later. This fundamental contradiction would poison every aspect of the investigation that followed. Luca didn't stick around to clarify. Shortly after making that call, he fled to Cyprus. The white Jeep Cherokee he'd been driving was found abandoned in Bedfordview. His Peugeot van turned up in Modderfontein. By the time police arrived at his house to process the scene, their primary suspect was already on a plane out of the country. The man who either killed Jackson or witnessed his murder had vanished, taking the truth with him. What makes this even more complicated is Mabasa's own position. Media reports later linked him to Radovan Krejcier's network, the same Czech fugitive who allegedly partnered with Jackson in money laundering operations. Mabasa retired under scrutiny just months after the murder. So we have a disputed confession made to a potentially compromised official by a suspect who immediately fled the country. And this was just hour one of the investigation. When police finally secured Luca's house in Edleen, they found Jackson's body in the garage, but he hadn't been shot there. According to the charge sheet filed in 2014, Jackson was killed in the lounge during what investigators called a scuffle that evolved into Luca drawing a pistol. After the shooting, someone dragged Jackson's body into the garage. The blood trail told that story clearly enough. But then came the forensic failures that would cripple any prosecution. The murder weapon, the most critical piece of physical evidence, wasn't found that night. It wasn't found the next day either. Police discovered the gun a full week after the murder, still in that same garage. 7 days of potential contamination. 7 days of broken chain of custody. 7 days that any defense lawyer would tear apart in court. Paul O'Sullivan, a forensic consultant known for investigating Krejcier, examined the scene. He reportedly found that the bullet and gun caliber didn't match rumors about a missing police firearm. Some had suggested Mabasa's weapon might have been involved, but the full ballistics reports were never publicly released. We don't know if the gun matched the bullets. We don't know if it had fingerprints. We don't know because the investigative process was so flawed that much of the evidence became legally questionable. Consider what else was in that house. Jackson had been driving around Johannesburg with massive amounts of cash. Police found 50,000 rands scattered in his Bentley's boot, another 50,000 on the passenger seat. He'd visited a bank ATM shortly before arriving at Luca's house. This was a man who moved serious money, meeting with his money launderer for unknown reasons. Yet investigators never established what that meeting was about. The scene told a story of chaos and poor police work. Evidence was moved before being documented. The murder weapon appeared late. Key forensic reports stayed sealed. The body was dragged from the crime scene to a secondary location. Every one of these failures created reasonable doubt. Even if prosecutors had the right suspect, they'd compromise their ability to prove it. The investigation didn't just face forensic problems, it faced a bureaucratic war. The Hawks officially led the murder probe, but they weren't the only players. Crime intelligence got involved because of Mabasa's phone call. The regular detective branch had their own interests, and each unit seemed to be working different angles. Sources close to the investigation said the Hawks and intelligence services had different agendas regarding Kreischer's connections. See, Jackson wasn't just a murder victim. He was potentially a witness in a foreign currency fraud probe. Police believed Jackson was preparing to testify against Kreischer. His death conveniently silenced that testimony. So was this a simple murder case, or part of a larger organized crime investigation? Depends which unit you asked. The Hawks wanted to nail Luca for murder. They had their narrative, an argument over money that turned violent. Crime intelligence seemed more interested in the broader network. Who ordered the hit? Who benefited from Jackson's silence? The detective branch was looking at Jackson's own criminal activities, the human trafficking through his strip clubs, the money laundering through Cyprus banks. 3 different investigations, 3 different priorities, 0 coordination. This fragmentation showed in how they handled witnesses. Michael Arsiotis, a Bedford View businessman linked to Kreischer's Moneypoint currency exchange, was supposed to testify. He stayed overseas when the trial was meant to begin. Constantine Costa Jackson, the victim's brother, was listed as a key witness, but his statements were never made public. These weren't random people. They were insiders who knew how Jackson's criminal network operated. But without a unified investigation, no single agency could guarantee their protection or compel their testimony. The interagency conflict created gaps that suspects exploited. While the Hawks and crime intelligence fought over jurisdiction and approach, Luca sat safely in Cyprus. Witnesses disappeared or refused to cooperate. Evidence got lost in bureaucratic shuffles. One source described it perfectly. Each faction had its own Kreischer inquiry and priorities. The fragmentation that was supposed to provide checks and balances instead provided cover for criminals. Getting Luca back from Cyprus should have been straightforward. South Africa filed extradition papers, they had a murder charge, they had a suspect who fled. But nothing about this case was straightforward. What followed was a 4-year legal marathon that gave every other potential witness time to disappear, and every piece of evidence time to degrade. Luca appeared before a Limassol court in March 2012, almost 2 years after the murder. His lawyers fought the extradition on multiple grounds. They challenged the legal framework. Cyprus and South Africa didn't have a direct extradition treaty. They questioned the evidence. Was there really proof Luca pulled the trigger? They raised humanitarian concerns. Would he get a fair trial in South Africa? The Cypriot courts moved at their own pace. Appeals followed hearings, followed delays. Meanwhile, back in Johannesburg, the case was growing cold. Witnesses who might have talked in 2010 had learned by 2012 what happened to people who knew too much about Jackson's network. His attorney Ian Jordan had been murdered before Jackson. His business partner Mark Andrews too. German supercar dealer Uwe Gambala ended up dismembered. The message was clear: stay quiet or join them. It took until early 2014 for the Cypriot Supreme Court to finally approve Luca's extradition. South Africa had leveraged mutual legal assistance agreements and EU treaties to make it happen. In February 2014, Luca was secretly flown back to face trial, 4 years after the murder. 4 years of degraded evidence, vanished witnesses, and faded memories. But even then, the legal games weren't over. Luca's South African lawyers immediately sought postponements. They challenged the charges. They requested more time to prepare. The January 2015 trial date came and went. The Palm Ridge Regional Court, acting with high court jurisdiction because of the case's importance, seemed unable to move things forward. Every delay favored the defense. Every postponement made conviction less likely. While lawyers argued over extradition and prosecutors struggled with crime scenes, one crucial aspect of the investigation withered: the money. Jackson's murder wasn't random violence. It emerged from a world of currency swaps, offshore accounts, and laundered millions. But following that money would have required the kind of coordinated investigation that South Africa's fractured law enforcement couldn't deliver. Alekos Panayi, a Greek Cypriot banker who worked for Laiki Bank's Johannesburg branch, had blown the whistle on the entire operation. His affidavit detailed how Jackson converted cash from his strip clubs into foreign currency. He described transactions involving Luca and Kreizier, millions moving through Cyprus shell companies. He even specified a failed currency swap, 1 million rand for euros, that created bad blood between Jackson and his partners. This wasn't vague intelligence. Panayi provided names, dates, amounts. He explained how Jackson would generate cash through teasers, how Luca would front the bank accounts in Cyprus, how Kreizier's Czech companies held signatory power. The scheme involved inflated Ferrari imports, fraudulent invoices, and systematic tax evasion. Following this trail could have revealed who controlled Jackson, who wanted him dead, and why. But the financial investigation never materialized. The Hawks focused on the murder charge against Luca. Crime intelligence pursued their own angles. The Financial Intelligence Center and SARS had their separate concerns. No one connected the dots between the failed currency deal and the fatal meeting at Luca's house. No one traced the money flows to establish motive. No one used Panayi's roadmap to uncover the larger conspiracy. By the time prosecutors got Luca into a South African courtroom, the financial evidence had become almost irrelevant. They were trying him for murder, not money laundering. The broader network that profited from Jackson's operations and possibly ordered his death remained untouched. The money trail that could have solved the case was never properly followed. In April 2015, as the Jackson murder trial was finally about to begin, George Luca was diagnosed with terminal lung cancer. Stage 4. Aggressive. Untreatable. The man who held all the answers about what happened that night in May 2010 was dying. The timing was almost too convenient to believe. Luca had spent over a year in custody since his extradition, maintaining his innocence, promising to reveal what really happened. His lawyers had submitted representations to the National Prosecuting Authority, seeking to have charges withdrawn. They claimed Luca would testify about who actually killed Jackson, would expose the real criminal network behind the murder. Now suddenly, he couldn't testify about anything. On May 11, 2015, Luca died in the prison hospital section of a Pretoria facility. He was days away from what should have been his trial. The Hawks issued a statement saying they would pursue an inquest using existing evidence, but everyone knew what this meant. Without a defendant, there would be no trial. Without a trial, there would be no testimony. Without testimony, the truth about Jackson's murder would remain buried. Luca's death fit a disturbing pattern in South African organized crime cases. Key witnesses and suspects had a habit of dying before they could reveal what they knew. Sometimes it was murder, like Jackson's attorney and business partner. Sometimes it was cancer, like Luca. Sometimes people just disappeared, like Uwe Gimbala before his body parts were found. But the result was always the same: silence. The prosecutors faced an impossible situation. They couldn't acquit a dead man. They couldn't retry him. The DPP lawyers considered holding a judicial inquest, but inquests don't assign criminal guilt. They just determine cause of death. And everyone already knew the cause of Jackson's death: multiple gunshot wounds. What they didn't know, and now would never know through legal proceedings, was who ordered it and why. As of 2025, 15 years after Emmanuel Jackson bled out in George Luca's garage, his murder remains officially unsolved. The file is open. Theoretically, investigators are still working the case. Practically everyone knows it's over. No new suspects have been charged. No fresh evidence has emerged. No witnesses have come forward. The investigation that started with a phone call confession has ended with nothing. The January 2016 trial date was struck from the court roll after Luca's death. Without him, prosecutors had no one to try. They had Luca's conflicting statements, both his alleged confession to Mabasa and his denials to media. They had the compromised crime scene. They had the whistleblower's financial records that no one properly investigated. They had a list of witnesses too scared or too smart to testify. None of it added up to a prosecutable case. What's remarkable is that this failure wasn't about lack of evidence. Investigators knew about Jackson's money laundering. They had details of his human trafficking operations. They understood his connections to Kreizier and the Czech organized crime network. They could trace millions in illegal currency swaps through Cyprus banks. They had a victim shot in front of witnesses, one of whom immediately called police. Yet somehow, all of this evidence couldn't produce a single conviction. The Jackson case has become a textbook study in how not to investigate organized crime. Scholars point to the interagency conflicts, the forensic failures, the witness protection void. Law enforcement officials reference it when explaining why complex cases fall apart. But these academic discussions miss the human reality. A man was murdered, his killer was identified, and the system still couldn't deliver justice. Some commentators argue it will remain officially unsolved because solving it would expose too much. Jackson's death touches on police corruption, with missing dossiers about his bribes to officials. It reveals government complicity, with city compliance officers taking payments to target rival clubs. It shows international crime networks operating freely through South African institutions. Maybe some cases are designed to fail. Now the file sits in storage somewhere, technically active but practically dead. Investigators have moved on to other cases. Witnesses have forgotten details or decided forgetting is safer. The crime scene is long since cleaned, the evidence degraded, the trail cold. Jackson's widow inherited his company and got new government contracts worth millions. The strip clubs keep operating. The money keeps flowing through offshore accounts. Only the names have changed. This is what passes for justice in South African organized crime. Everyone knows who did it, everyone knows why, and everyone knows nothing will happen. The investigation didn't fail because it couldn't find the truth. It failed because finding the truth and acting on it are two very different things in a system where criminals investigate criminals, where witnesses become victims, where evidence disappears, and where even confessions can't close a case.